I'm Sean McNamara. We're here on Sara Orchards outside of Winters, California. I work with my family and I am the farm manager. We farm about 450 acres in total. Most of that is in organic walnuts, some is in olives, and we also run sheep and chickens through our orchards. We brought in sheep 6 years ago, and at that time it was really just to help us manage the cover crop. We think it's important to have living plants covering all the soil as much of the year as possible. So walnuts are harvested off the floor. We shake the trees, sweep them into a windrow and pick them up. That's done mechanically in a couple passes. And the floor in early October has to be pretty clean for harvest. We had been growing these big biomass cover crops for 10 years, orchard grass, fava beans, all crawling with purple vetch. And we were getting thatch issues because year after year we weren't incorporating them properly. And we did two things. We brought in the sheep and we started to change our seed mixes. The sheep did a great job managing the cover crop. They even have this co-benefit of pruning the walnut suckers. So the black walnut root stock will try to grow every year, creating these suckers, and the sheep's prune them tight. That was a job we had to do every year with shovels. And then we started to recognize the fertility benefits. We test a couple times a year our soil, and we take foliar samples for nitrogen, and completely backing off any organic fertilizer input, transitioning to our homemade compost, which is pretty high carbon, and even dialing back the legumes in our cover crops to 3 species out of the 14 species that will be in a mix. Our nitrogen levels are through the roof, right where we want them to be for a good crop. And speaking about fertility, their hooves do a really good job, right? So they're not only pooping and peeing, they're also incorporating that manure, that urine, and plant matter along with it into the soil. One of the things that especially my dad was really worried about when we brought on sheep, because we usually bring them in mid-January, was compaction, which is a real concern. And we found that just by playing with our stocking density and the rate that we move them, we can really minimize compaction. So for the most part, their hooves are doing a good job. They're pushing things into the top layer of the soil in just the right way. There were some struggles early on incorporating sheep, but those two things, the floor management, tree management, and fertility, kept us going. And now, 6 years into it, we're starting to see all these tangible and some intangible benefits. So I mentioned IPM earlier, and I just want to go into that a little bit further. IPM is integrated pest management. You actually mentioned mummy nuts. That's a big one for us. So a mummy nut would be a nut that is not ready to fall when we shake the tree. It comes down later with the winds and rains. Mummy nuts, either in the tree, but especially on the ground, can be overwintering habitat for the navel orange worm, which can be a really major pest in walnuts, almonds. The traditional way to get rid of mummy nuts would be to reshake the trees in November, December, and then mow the nuts on the orchard floor or disc. That provides some challenges for us in our ethos around farming. Running a heavy shaker through the trees, through the orchards in November, you often get into soil compaction issues. And then with the sheep, we don't mow until July 1st, which is the beginning of our 90-day pre-harvest interval. That's determined by our certifier. I think it's different for other certifiers. But the sheep, every time I go out to the sheep, I hear the sound of sheep crunching on walnuts. So the walnuts fall, and the sheep, with either their mouths or their hooves, are crunching those walnuts, decimating the habitat for a pest that can really be harmful to us. That's a huge one. And the thing that in our early years with sheep I recognized was that they're moving at the pace of nature. So our other tool to manage cover crop is the flail mower. 12-foot flail mowers, 95 horsepower tractor, going through the orchards at 3 to 5 miles an hour, maybe even faster. A lot of vibration, a lot of decimation, and you're taking down a whole universe, a whole ecosystem so quickly that you're not giving even your beneficial insects and predators who would prey on potential pests to your crop, you're not giving them a chance to move out of the way. So the sheep, as they're grazing, I think just keeping the beneficials high, keeping your predators high, really helps with your IPM. So we have not had any major pest issues in the last couple of years, at least ones that could be influenced by the sheep. There are some things like scale and mites that we're still working with. But that's a huge one right there. Just moving at the pace of nature and letting the things, everyone re-enter the system. Change system, a graze system, but re-enter in their own time. One of the reasons that we partner with shepherds is because most of our ground is planted out into orchards, walnut orchards, most of it. We raise the cover crop up, we plant cool season annuals, some perennials. By January, mid-January, it's ready to start feeding carefully. And then as things really get warm in early March, the cover crop takes off and we've kind of got to be ready for it with the sheep. And then they're only here until July 1st, which is the beginning of our 90-day pre-harvest interval. So there's a pretty good block of the year that our land can't support sheep, which makes these collaborations we've had really useful. This group that's been hanging out behind me is a smaller group of largely dorpers. They are kind of our year-round herd. They work their way around the farm throughout the year. But by March 1st, we've usually got at least 800 sheep per 100 acres. So that's how we can get up to the big numbers sometimes. And a larger shepherd can have sheep trucked in 400 sheep loads, a little bit smaller if they're ewe lamb pairs, and can drop them on this beautiful green cover crop and help us catch up or get ahead. So if we take just a 100-acre field and look at that, we'll start mid to late January with 800 sheep and try to get at least 2 rotations in there. If we just take February to July, that's February, March, April, May, June, 5 months, 150 days, and we want at least 45 days between rotations. So that can give us 3 full rotations on the same ground. That's when we really nail our stocking density, our grazing rate, and if we do that, that means that we are not grazing everything down. We're grazing it to about 50–60% and moving the sheep. So it's a lot more moving fences, but it can yield really good results. A lot of feed for the sheep, a lot of carbon pumped into the soil. So that would be the best thing for us, about 800 sheep per 100 acres, 5 months, rotated 3 times. But that's a pretty quick clip. And to do that, we usually keep the sheep in 2 groups, 400 sheep each, and the pen size or paddock size will vary anywhere from 2 to 5 acres. And that variance is influenced by a couple things. Weather and wetness could be one of them. So if we have a big storm coming, or if we just got 5 inches of rain, things are really wet, we want to spread them out a little bit and move them faster to avoid compaction. If we've got all hands on deck and we can move fences quickly, and like in the first pass of the year, there's not a ton of cover crop, but we do want to get the sheep through to slow it down a little bit. That might be a time where we keep them tight, mob graze things, and move them quickly. So that's a pattern that we use. There's a lot of factors to manage for in trying to get the most out of the cover crop and treat it and your soil the best. Again, with 14 different species in the cover crop, 10 to 14 depending on the year. They're all going to want to go to seed at different times. They're in different growth stages at different times. So like the mustard behind us, we didn't actually plant that. That's a whole other category. That's weeds, which are also coming up with your cover crop, which can be helpful or can be a hindrance. And I'll talk about foxtail in a second. But we are managing the sheep, the cover crop, and the orchards all at the same time. So an example of that would be our clovers. Clovers can be more expensive in your seed mix. They put their little seed down right at the base, so it's a pretty fragile spot as opposed to having it way up in the air where it can flop out. And they're later than a lot of other things. They're so much later than a radish, for instance. So we'd like to not be reseeding clovers every year because they're expensive. So it's an intention to treat our clovers in such a way that they will reseed. And that usually means that maintaining that 50 to 60% graze, because they tend to be lower, and moving the sheep through a little bit faster in the early season, keeping an eye on them for when they do go to seed. That's something that Jeremy Shepherd is really honing in on, is how to treat each plant best. The foxtail, on the other hand, that's a weed we don't like. There's a lot of foxtail in the region. It can be decent forage for sheep when it's soft and green, but it puts that sharp seed head on, which can get into a sheep's nostril or a dog's and really cause havoc. We are also trying to move fast enough to get to all the foxtail when it is green, try to chomp it down and not let it develop a seed head. So cover crop mixes, we've got clovers like ladino, white, sub, rose, balsam. We've got grasses like beardless barleys and orchard grass, which we don't use very much anymore. Even perennial alfalfa can be a fun thing to mix in. That's a legume. We're starting to seed things that are actually good for human consumption. We seeded a bunch of garbanzos this year because we love fresh garbanzos. We like some of the brassicas that can be nematocidal or compaction relieving. So the daikon radish, the nematode control radish, Phacelia, we've got sandfoin, which is a really good one for the sheep. That's about what I can remember right now.
Great.
Yeah. This is fun. This is a good representation of some of the cover crop things we've got going. We've got a little Phacelia, one of those nematode control radishes. There's some vetch in there, some tiny little clovers, some things we certainly didn't plant, burr clover, oxalis, mallow. We'll see how the sheep do with those. But then, yeah, I just wanted to show some of the kind of aggregation in this soil. It sticks together really nicely. We're on a yellow sandy loam here, certainly with some clay on it. We're on the Solano side. So some clay is sticking it together, but I'll pull a root out in a second and we'll see some of the really nice just aggregation of the soil, nice globules on the roots. There's a little worm right there. Lots of worm holes I'm seeing. I'm seeing organic matter down pretty far with maybe some mycelium on it. I mean, it wants to stay together. And that's this combination of no-till, sheep, compost, cover crop. I mean, it doesn't want to crumble. It wants to hang on to its bits. We're really trying to bump up our soil organic matter as kind of a marker of carbon sequestration and other activity and good things. When we really got on this path to refining our system 6 or 7 years ago, our organic matter is still pretty low, 1.2, 1.3%. And as of last year, we were up at 3.6, 3.8. So we've seen it pretty steadily climb year after year, and we're excited to test it again in April or so, see what's going on. So a lot of color, a lot of organisms, a lot of life, tiny castings all over the place. Yeah, it looks good. It smells good. Tastes good. That's our soil show and tell. So for us, it made more sense in the beginning to work with a shepherd in a contract grazing arrangement. And that can look like a lot of different things. In some cases, the shepherd pays the landowner. The landowner could pay the shepherd. It could be kind of a zero-sum thing where the shepherd gets forage and the landowner gets all the ecosystem benefits that we talked about. So it made sense for us because we only had dependable forage for 6 months out of the year. We worked with a couple different shepherds, some very large scale, some small, medium scale. I think it's important to recognize that it's a long-term relationship, or it should be. It takes a lot of years to understand how the incorporation of animals into a farming system will play out, what the responses will be. We've learned so much and we're still learning, and again, there's things that I'm not sure we'll ever figure out. But the big challenges we've run into would be one around a compound called copper sulfate, which is something that's an organic OMRI certified compound that we use in the spring. We apply it to the walnut trees to counter the effects of walnut blight or bacterial blight. Different people have different reads on it. I personally feel that copper can be somewhat toxic to sheep if they feed on it in certain ways. It's a little bit different for, a lamb that's going to slaughter in 5 months and for a ewe that might be raising lambs for 5 years. And we spray it on a day's notice. It's weather dependent. So we've had some occurrences where we're about to spray copper and we're out running around corralling sheep and building new paddock for them outside the orchard, and talking with the sprayer drivers or pilots, and it can be complex and somewhat traumatic if you don't plan for that. The other one would be animals not where they're supposed to be, getting out, fences going down. Animals getting onto the road could be a big issue, a big liability. Predators, coyotes, raccoons, humans, bobcats, they're all out here. And then in that relationship building, your lamb or crop management goals might not be aligned with the shepherd's goals. They need to raise healthy, heavy sheep for market, and you need to get the most out of your cover crop for your whole system. Fertility, moisture retention, soil organic matter, pest control. So if someone wants to go in there and graze it too low or graze it too late or too early, that can all be detrimental to your goals and intentions. So finding the common ground between those two is really important, one that we've worked at for a lot of years. We would love to have our own herd. There's some challenges there, given that most of our ground is planted into orchards. But increasingly, we are performing the caretaking labor so that we can get the desired outcomes. We're moving fence, we're bringing water, we're checking on the sheep so that we can move them at the rate we want to. So as of last year, we've got a laying hen operation, and it's called Orchard Eggs. Look for us. And we're starting to bring them in after the sheep, working with some logistic hurdles of timing and fitting the coops down the rows. But we hope that if it works out, it can have, even higher system benefits. Chickens eat things that sheep don't. Chickens will eat mycelium, they'll eat maggots and larvae in the sheep poop. They can reduce the amount of time you need between repassing a group of sheep on the same ground. So if it was 45 days, maybe it's 30 days with chicken because they might eat the worms out of the poop. They also have, a super bioavailable nitrogen in their manure. We're learning. That's a new venture. It's interesting. We got into sheep to manage cover crop, and now we're seriously considering starting our own herd. And shepherding is not easy. We've worked a lot with the shepherds. It is full-time, 24/7 on-call work. It can be heavy and hard and hot and cold and sad. And yet we've found that we like to do it a lot more than the farm jobs that sheep replace, whether that's fertilizing or mowing or disking. And they bring us a ton of joy. We hope they can bring us another revenue stream and product. We're in the process of selling a few of our walnuts on the commodity market and diverting the other products we produce to more direct to consumer. And I think it's a great offering to have really healthy, thoughtfully raised meat for people. Yeah, we love it. It's not for everyone. It's not easy. If you're interested in it, I would definitely say ask around, find a shepherd, support shepherds, promote shepherds. There's not enough of them. It's hard work. It's hard to make money year after year. And start that relationship early. If you want to start your grazing in January, start talking to someone 9 months before. Have a couple visits with them. Buy them a meal. Work toward a long-term relationship. Take your time. Yeah.
Great.